Thanks, Ashok. We will now have the last session of the day. This is on enabling low-emission zones in India. May I please request Amit Bhatt to come on the stage. He will be the moderator for this session. The panelists are Shri Arindam Roy from Clean Air Fund. Can we please have you on the stage? Sudeept Maiti, Shri Nitin Panigrahi from SRDC, and Nidhi Madan from Shakti Sustainable.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Last session of the day, we'll be very quick, to the point, very engaging. All the panelists have promised me. But before we start, why don't we set the context? And then the question that we'll try to answer in this panel, where do we start the LEZ story in India? So,
thanks, Amit. So this will be very brief. We have seen certain interventions on not exactly low emission zones, but interventions around how to curb emissions. And there are several approaches. One is the judicial approach, where the classic example is Delhi, Supreme Court banning diesel vehicles and forcing CNG. That is one approach. The other being a bottom to top approach, where the city pedestrianizes a certain street, creates a low emission zone. The other is a top to bottom approach, where the states are pushing for a low emission zone intervention. Gujarat being, Kevadia being the example of the first electric vehicle only zone. And the fourth approach being, everyone knows about the Taj trapezium zone. In this case, the national government is pushing for a pollution control zone. Now the question is, throughout the day we had conversations about what is a low emission zone, how do we implement it, what is the legal framework available, what is the technology and data use. Now the question is, where do we start? Which one of these approaches would the panel think is best? Is there a hybrid model? Is there a whatever? I mean, that's the question, I think, for this panel. And over to you, Amit.
Yeah, thanks, Vaibhav. I think a couple of interesting takeaways is one, and again, we all know the whole CNG transition, and in a way, it was a move aimed towards lower emission, if not low emission. And again, it had a lot of positive impact as well. And then you have also seen that whether it is Taj, Mahal or Kevadia, a lot of it is revolving around tourist places. And somehow there is a growing traction that tourism places needs to have lower emission. And so that's one big interesting takeaway that we are seeing. And then third is, and again we saw in the second session that there is legal pathway to initiate low emission zone conversation in India, be it national level, state level, or even at a city level. The question is, where do we start? So let me first ask by Nitin to share some insights on the Chandni Chowk redevelopment. I mean, it's a pedestrianization project, but in a way it's also a low emission zone project as well. So how did it start and what came out will be very interesting for us to understand.
Thank you, Amitabh. In fact, when we talk about the low emission zones, then suddenly it comes to the only e-vehicles comes into the mind. But if we take it in a larger perspective, it is also the e-vehicles. At the same time, it is also about the pedestrian and the cyclist. So when in 2014, the Shahjahanabad Redevelopment Corporation started this project after the judicial intervention, which has started in 2007 by a petition by an NGO, that vehicles should be stopped here, vehicles should be restricted, and more of the non-motorized vehicle has to be given a priority in this area. So there, when though there was a judicial support was there, but the project was remaining in limbo for almost 7 years, from 2007 to 2014. The reason was, in the last session we have talked about the more of the science of it. So let me speak more on the art of it, because it is more of, means I am not a specialist, but an officer, so I can tell you about how it can be enabled. So the biggest challenges before us was the perception battle, which is to be fought. There are the two perspectives there. One is from the perspective of the stakeholders, those who are private, the traders, the residents, and few more. And there is a perspective from the government. The perspective from the traders were in the Chandni Chowk area, that if we restrict the vehicles, then the businesses are going to be affected adversely. And at the same time, there was a perspective from the government, which is always, a decision has to be political. So there was a political choice of going to restrict the vehicle may adversely affect the political outcome of the ruling dispensation. So this was a two approaches, there are two perspectives, then there was a conflict on it. So the challenge before was to create this perception, no, it is not like that. So we started the stakeholder consultation with the different interested group, whether it is about the traders, residents, traffic police, the municipal corporations, and many others. And almost you will be surprised, there were 18 agencies were involved, because the objective of this particular project was to bring the pedestrianization while ensuring that the intervention which we are making, that is technically feasible as well as it is environmental sustainable. So the judicial intervention has certainly helped, but the approach was always to go to the people, talk to them, bring them into fold, and that is why this project has been successful, because we have gone in the phases. In the first phase, we divided into 4 zones, so we closed the first phase. So we said, fine, just to experience it. If you are closing the road, one way road is closed, then how you are feeling the difficulties. So now, okay, fine, now it is working, so let's go for the other side of the road. So that is how we have gone gradually, and it is worked. So judicial outreach is there, it helps, but certainly the government has to intervene from the lower, at the ground. You have to be in the dialogue with the public, which are the ultimate stakeholder in the project, to convince them and to bring on the board. So that is why I always say the 4P of enabling this entire low emission zone could be, the first is your people, then the perception, then we can talk about the participation, and the third is also to see the profit. Because unless it makes an economic sense to the people living and the people affected by this project, it is not going to be successful. So many intervention has to be there in this context, and that is how the approach has to be very comprehensive. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nitin. I think very interesting insight, looking at the art and science, the art part, and then what you really mentioned was the perception. I think it's a very interesting point on how do you change, because a lot of projects we have seen become non-starter just because the perception is so different. So Arindam, on this point, on the perception point, can you also highlight what is Clean Air Fund doing on kind of making sure understanding of transport emission data to change the perception that it's a severe problem that needs to be resolved?
Thank you for the question. So I guess one of the key things here is engagement of civil society and sort of making sure that public perception and make it a more of a equitable in terms of everything considered financially and also socio-economically. I mean, having said that, as you mentioned, it was quite a nice example in Delhi that people have a different, like the local food, local stalls, they have a different sort of expectations regarding it, that it might go wrong, it might, so these kind of pilots actually leads to some sort of evidence that this might work in the global south, in the cities, in developing cities. So with Clean Air Fund, I mean, we have been engaging in low emission zone in a couple of countries in Europe and UK. And with that, here is a question that we always internally discuss, that what is the scope in a country, in India or in Africa, what is the scope of low emission zone there? And now the problem here is we didn't have much evidence, but now as like Delhi, as there are other examples, like the small evidence are, gradually generating. So we will look into it, that how philanthropy can brings the expertise from, if it is a north to south exchange in terms of knowledge, bringing the expertise, implement there, but at the same time, we always vocal for the local knowledge, because, one of my experience previously, I go to the municipality and talk to them, talk to the people who are implementing clean air action plans. And what I understand that, irrespective of the data and everything, they know it all. They know their city very well. They know, so that knowledge, that thumb rules, we also need to incorporate that to modify the strategy, because we cannot simply take something from the global north, and because majorly the land use, we are in a mixed land use pattern country, and this is very difficult, very different. It would be very different to implement the same thing in India. So we need to Indianize it. And here, I guess, there is a scope of multi-layer stakeholder consultation, where I believe that Clean Air Fund could bring a lot of value into this.
Thanks a lot, Arindam. I think multi-stakeholder consultation is absolutely important, and maybe we'll come back again to Nitin to share some insight on how this was done in the Chandni Chowk case. But Nidhi, you want to share some insight on what Shakti is doing in this area of work?
Yeah, thanks Amit, thank you NITI Aayog and ICCT for organizing this very important consultation. And I do agree that low emission zone requires local solution, it requires human-centric approaches, and that is why we are working closely with partner organizations like ICCT, ITDP, Artha Global and WRI, CSC on having localized solution, because it's very much important that the stakeholders who are involved should be part of this consultation, should be part of this planning, whole planning. So that is why it's very much important. So we are working with the cities at the with 2 states in the south, and we are also working in Delhi Lieutenant area, wherein we are actually helping them implement the LEZ plans. But having said that, I'll just like to explain some of the example that we have had with the Bihar engagement. So with Bihar, we have helped them in their energy transition planning, which is soon getting, on 2nd of March, we are getting the blessing of Chief Minister Sir for endorsing that plan. But what really come out here is, we have a modeling study which says that this should be the Bihar trajectory and all. But the localized solutions and the localized recommendation which have come up was really helpful. I'll give an example here. One recommendation was a very generic recommendation which came out that, okay, promote public transportation. That was a very generic thing. But what really government asked for, please let me know what is a footfall. Please let me know what is a peaking hour, so that we can plan the buses accordingly. So these kind of intervention, government are actually looking out so that they can plan it in a better way and it not lead to any kind of malfunctioning. So this is a very important initiative while having LEZ in place, be it transport or for economy-wide planning. This is a key which needs to be taken care of. Thanks.
I think very interesting that this energy transition and then linking that to the low emission zone is an interesting story. And again, I'll come back to you as a follow-up. But Sudeept, one question to you, and you've been working in this space for a very long time. Any kind of restrictive measures is always a problem, right? So how do you break that barrier? Because one, definitely we know we have to start somewhere. But where do we start, especially some of the trickier parts? How do you kind of engage on this conversation?
Yeah. I'd just like to say that I think the points on the conversation with the stakeholders are paramount. And I agree with all my co-panelists here that that's going to be the make or break of it. The second point I'd like to highlight is that it's in the details of how this transition is going to work. And it's a transition that will impact the stakeholders considerably. While we sit and look at a map and say that this will be a great idea, I think we can only imagine about 50% of the transformation it will make in people's lives, and they're not all positive. If something like this has to be done, and for every successful project, we know, and each one of us in this room know about 50 other projects that have failed because the communication hasn't been consistent, the transparency hasn't been there. But I think one significant piece that we haven't talked about is the transitioning, especially for brownfield sites, the transitioning plan from going from day zero to the end game. That transition plan needs to be detailed quite specifically, and it will require significant amount of behavioral change incentives that starts shifting people gradually to what is needed in that neighborhood. Inclusivity, it's non-negotiable. If you're leaving people behind, you're creating something else. There have been a lot of sciences that look at how to incentivize it, but I also think that the government mechanisms also need to dovetail into it. One low-hanging fruit is definitely something to consider, and I mean, considering that all our BS3 vehicles are going to be transitioning in the next 5 years, we just, for an example, we just need incentives for proper scrappage, ensuring that there is no extension, of the 15-year-old vehicles, and some incentive to get these people who are going to be transitioning into new vehicle in all probability. How do you kind of get them on board into a new thing? I think that plan, how detailed that plan is going to be really important.
No, absolutely. I think detailing a plan is important. And I think you also mentioned engagement. And this engagement has been coming since morning. We have to engage, right? And while we agree we have to engage, but engagement is a very difficult proposition, right? It's very easy to say, engage, take your story out, talk to people. But once you start talking, it goes into a different spiral altogether. People will complain with 20 other things, a very genuine complaint. So Nitin, especially Chandni Chowk, and with such a multiplicity authority, and with such kind of densities that we see, one, if you could shed some insight on how did you do this engagement bit, and how did you manage the expectation through this process? It will be very interesting to know.
As I told you, that 4 P's of that, again I'll repeat that. It is people, perception, participation, and profit. So when we call for the stakeholder consultation, we have to understand that the vocal voices may have that resistance or may have the disagreement. So sometimes what happens is when we have the stakeholder consultation, we remain much more focused towards those voices which are more vocal, but we ignore those voices which are silent or which might be subdued due to various reasons. So a stakeholder consultation has to be taken at various levels. Sometimes we can have all together. Sometimes you have to go to them at a separate group so that to understand everybody's priority and the aspirations separately. So that is a key to it. Stakeholders consultation cannot have a single model. And always, we have to be always remaining open to listen to them, even if it is a voice of a very insignificant group. Like in the Chandni Chowk, I had also had a meeting with the people, those who are the loaders, those who carry those. They are basically, if you see, they are using the non-emission vehicles. They are just using the handheld carts, but nobody has spoken to them before. So we spoke to them and we understood what is their issues if we close this area for the vehicles. Because they had a problem. Because if you close that area for the vehicles, then they had to go for the longer distance to get the goods unloaded from the vehicle, and then it gets loaded into their hand cart, and then it has to come. And that is why the costing also increases. At the same time, their labor and their effort also increases. So there you have to address it. So to address this, we have created few loading and loading hubs. So there the vehicle goes. It is near to the your Chandni Chowk main street, and from there they pick up the goods and they come to the different katras and everywhere. So that is why the stakeholder consultation, as you asked, it has to be multi-level. It can't have the single format. It has to be localized, as Mr. Roy said. We have to understand the local context. We have to understand their aspirations, and accordingly we have to modify our stakeholder consultation process entirely. And definitely the political participation is also required. So that is the key to it. And I understand, because the Chandni Chowk, if it can be done in the Chandni Chowk, it can be done anywhere in the country. Because we had the data, almost at one particular time, or you can say the entire day, around 10,000 vehicles were coming to this area entirely. And at a particular time, almost 1,200 to 1,300 vehicles were getting parked on the street. And getting them out was a difficult challenge. But again, we have to understand that why it has been successful, because as he said, the enablers has to be there. Enablers, what was enabler there? The metro stations were already there. So when we did it, the people had the choice that they could reach the Chandni Chowk area through metros. And then now the next stage for us could be strengthening the road, the other peripheral roads. There we can provide the electrical vehicles so that it can, we can reduce the other further congestion in the entire area. But again, I would like to bring here the challenge which we are facing right now. The Chandni Chowk road, we want to introduce some kind of a vehicle, e-vehicle, which can cater to people, those who are maybe, the old age, maybe Divyang and few others. But the e-vehicles, those who are manufactured here, those are not very low floor, and they are not those kind of vehicle which can be run into the short stoppages. So that is a challenge we are facing. So that is where the e-vehicle format has to be also to be seen, what kind of e-vehicle format can be introduced in the low emission zones. So that public transportation is also to be re-engineered. So that is how we can. Thank you.
And just a follow-up, Nitin, you initially mentioned that there's a big resistance from shopkeepers that if you stop vehicles, the sales will go down. Now, you've been having this for 3-4 years now. Is there any data which backs this claim or contradicts this claim that if you stop vehicle, the impact on economic productivity?
Data in the sense, there is no such study has been conducted as such, but we have the secondary data. If you see the GST collection in that area, which has increased, the sales has certainly got improved there, and the footfall in the metro stations there has gone several times. So these are two indicators that the resistance from the reservations from the traders has gone down, because now they are seeing the benefit of it. And we have also received few requests from other markets in the area that yes, we also want to go for it. So I understand that our assertion or our assumption was right, that restricting the vehicles does not affect your business if you provide the alternative approaches to that area, and it rather works in another way. It increases the businesses. Local economic development certainly takes place. It improves. Thank you.
Very interesting insight. I think this is very fantastic. Arindam, in some of the LEZ work that you have been supporting in other parts of the world, is this same that LEZ and economic productivity are not two competing priorities and they kind of help in economic productivity of the city? Is that you have seen in elsewhere?
I mean, see, what I, in the deep down, there has been a lot of studies regarding this LEZ and economic activities and these kind. So there are a couple of things here is very important, that whether the economic activity within the LEZ as it's seen by the Chandni Chowk case, it's similar to that. There are many examples which is very similar to that. It didn't decrease, but at the same time, here I want to talk about a different sort of economy, that the revenue generated by LEZ. Because in Chandni Chowk example, one of the prerequisite was having a metro station, so the public transport. So ideally, the revenue coming from LEZ, through taxation or any other form, so that should be invested in public transport itself, and then there should be a transparency. This is missing in many cases in the global north examples, where these sort of transparency, that where the revenue is going, it's a huge amount of money. And here I guess we can focus a little bit, because it has to do a lot with the sustainability of the projects, because we would love to see these things running for decades possibly, and those revenue could possibly fuel this particular issue. But as per the economy, and another aspect here, I believe, is the initial cost. Like sometimes if you mandate that there is no car beyond a certain point, or only electric car or low emitting vehicle after a certain point, there will be people who will need economic subsidy to overcome that barrier. And here also, people consultation, like the mass consultation and the stakeholder consultations, those will be definitely important to set the bar of that particular, how much the subsidy will be, and what sort of people will require, what economic category people will require those subsidy. These are the few points we definitely need to consider here. But I'm really sort of impressed by the Delhi case study, because if it is in Chandni Chowk, it can be, and if we see the sort of a potential of this, scaling up potential, this is enormous. And another thing I want to mention particularly, because it's not only air pollution that is being impacted by this decision. The consumer behavior towards more cleaner vehicle transport sector, there are evident that people are buying like better vehicles, because of this sort of decision, LEZ. And so it will tick multiple SDGs altogether once it's been there. So, but again, the prerequisites and the implementation, the granularity of the implementations, that is what matter. The rest, communication part, of course, it's definitely important for the implementation purpose.
Thanks, Arindam. Sudeept, just follow up on this. You've been also looking at this space for a long time. Are we seeing some, again, data on vehicle restriction and economic productivity of markets? We did talk about Times Square pedestrianization and some of the other projects. Do we have some data which contradicts this perception, very strong perception, right? So like, Chandni Chowk was able to do, but Connaught Place has been trying to pedestrianize the inner circle for the last 20, 30 years without any success. So, and the main question comes, if you stop vehicles, the sales will go down.
Okay, so there are many studies across the globe that talk about how the sales have gone up because your pedestrian footfall increases, and therefore people tend to shop a lot more. A lot of those global examples, however, do not translate very well into Indian circumstances because the kind of sensitivities that are involved. There is, what comes to mind is that I think there's an IIC study also involved with their attempt at pedestrianization, with the Karnataka government, and the findings there was that the sales increased. However, the perception was that the sales did not increase. Now, this plays a huge role because what started off as like a weekly event was going to extend on to another major part of the market. And there was huge opposition because the perception was that all it did was create a situation that people were not familiar how to navigate. And that started creating a lot of opposition. And any other effort is any other effort was shot down with that as an example, so that the perception of it becomes a huge, huge issue and something that works against the idea.
Very interesting. I think the Bangalore story that while the data may show that the sales have gone up, but the perception will still be that sales have gone down. And how do you navigate the data versus perception story would be interesting. And Nidhi, on this, are you in some of the places that you are working, are you also trying to do some of this before and after, some of the impact analysis just to make a powerful story come out and so that we can scale up some of these work?
Well, some of the indoor air quality programs that we have been working in Chhattisgarh, wherein we have worked with the health workers there, and there we have seen a lot of improvement in the indoor air quality. So what happened is we have engaged with the primary health workers there. So that continuous engagement actually led to a lot of increase in air quality as well as the health. So that could be the one lens, and of course the economic lens that they are saving on their medicines and all these stuff. These are some of the interventions in which we want to, these are the low-hanging fruits of course, but certainly these are some of the lenses that we need to think of. Like air quality, we have seen that one of the criteria for reducing the FDI in the country. So these are some of the initiatives we have to think from the city perspective that, okay, the private investment will decrease if, the air quality is bad. So these are some of the angles we need to think of and while engaging with cities and governments.
Absolutely, and I think this is absolutely important. So on this, Nitin, just a follow-up question. Now that Chandni Chowk is there, it's a proven concept, it's working. How do we create more such Chandni Chowks? And then how do we kind of scale up? Because we did some pilot, did a proof of concept, it works. But how do you achieve scale? Is there any insight on that?
Though, Ms. Chandni Chowk project has worked as a catalyst to have a thought for bringing more such low emission zones. And the government has also taken major steps, making many roads retrofitted with the footpaths and the cycle lane and other things. But when we talk about the scaling up, I always tell it is cheaper and quicker to do it, but we require to move into, it's like the game we play for the Lego. We have to go in a smaller unit. And the smaller unit which comes to my mind is a municipal ward. So the ward level mobility planning if we do, then we can scale it up, because in Delhi, we can't create many such zone like which we created in Chandni Chowk, because it was a very compact area with a high economic activity. And as you talked about, why it has not been successful in the Connaught Place. So if you compare the economic activity of the Chandni Chowk and the economic activity of Connaught Place, it is in a different measure. So that has to be seen. The economic activity, the density also works in the favor of the Chandni Chowk. That has not worked in the favor of Connaught Place. So when we talk about the ward level mobility planning, we should not be insisting the low emission zone has to be created by retrofitting the roads with your footpath or your cycle lane. But we have to work on making many wards, many municipal wards, in a one-way traffic, circulation plan can be made. So where we can accommodate few of the low emission zone, like the two-wheelers, the last session we were talking about how to promote the two-wheelers. We can create few instead of cycle lane, we can have, this area can be for the low emission vehicles, the two-wheelers we can create. And we also need to open up few areas which are being now closed. Like most of the pedestrian or the cyclist, or whether you talk about those smaller Yulu bike and anything, they would like to move through the shorter distance. The shorter distance in Delhi, most of the areas, which I call the islands of prosperity, there we close the public spaces through the colony gates. So these colony gates in Delhi has to be opened up. It has to use for creating those pedestrian pathways, low emission vehicle movement, maybe for the two-wheelers. So that is how we can scale up, and it can be quicker and cheaper also, because the government cannot invest so much of money for creating your the retrofitting the roads for the cycle lane or the footpaths. And sometimes I also find it very interesting to see, because the road guidelines which is being prepared by the different agencies are too strict. You have to have a footpath of this length or this width. But many of the places we find the footpaths, suppose there the space is there 1 feet, and other side of the road it is 1 feet or 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet. So I don't understand, why don't you make the footpath at least on one side which is 4 feet, so that can be used. So don't make this kind of guidelines which is making much more rigid. It has to be very flexible when you're talking about making the low emission zones. It has to be localized. It has to be ward level mobility plan. It has to be a bottom-up approach. Let the people tell you, yes, we need this road to be made one way, and please bring, a few pedestrian pathway through our colony so that kids can go to their school. We can go to the your sports complex. We can go to the park. So that culture of taking people, going to the park or the sports complex, to the gym by car has to be changed. So that is how we can change to the ward level mobility planning, and it is a way to scale up. We can have the bigger plans, we can have the master plan, but yes, when it comes to the X level point, it has to go down at the ward level. Thank you.
Interesting. So ward level planning, and that actually becomes the operational planning, because this is how we actually do. A lot of plan is more of a strategic guidance that you should do this, but ward level is actually in terms of more of an implementation plan. So I think that's a very, very interesting point that you mentioned. But for cities which don't have like Chandni Chowk experiment, how do they go about initiating the dialogue? So maybe Sudeept, Arindam, you want to share some insight from your side? Maybe Delhi has a Chandni Chowk, so you can replicate, but there are cities which may not have these examples.
Yeah, I think in these cases, and this is going to be the case for many parts of the country, in these cases, I think it is the bottom-up approach that is going to win, and the bottom-up approach with champions in the stakeholder who is also championing for the idea. It's only when you start looking, if the stakeholders are convinced, getting the government on board to have a conversation as to how we should go about this is a much easier task than probably the other way around. I think that might be the way to go about it.
I think I would like to add another thing, that the smaller cities, like the tier 2 cities, that might be because people ride in bicycle, and there is a culture of riding bicycle or use footpath, and also like a little bit of public transport is also available there. So tier 2 cities could be good places to do more pilots and more experiments to fix a methodology, how to start on that. And on my experience, I have seen that the smaller cities, like the government, they are like the local government are usually more enthusiastic about several things, and they appreciate and they welcome these ideas sometimes. So I guess to scale up or to experiments to generate more evidence, basically, these smaller cities could be an good starting point.
Nidhi, your insight, smaller cities is the way to go about?
So, it's of course, I agree with my fellow panelists that we need localized solution, and what we really need is, of course, a win-win situation for all the stakeholders. We need to design some very human-friendly interventions, and that, of course, involves continuous engagement by the powerhouses, which we call as civil society organizations. So, of course, involving the right stakeholders, converging various schemes which are there, how we can benefit the local MSMEs who are there, then also all the stakeholders, local vendors, all those needs. There, of course, there will be losers, but how we can minimize their losses, that's very much important. And more important is, those interventions might lead to malfunctioning, but there should be a scope for mid-course correction. So these are some of the interventions which need to be designed in a proper manner.
Absolutely, and I think that is the way forward. Before I pose my next question, if you have any questions to any of the fellow panelists where you want to ask, you may raise your hand. Someone will come with mic, I don't know who, but magically a mic will appear wherein you will have to introduce yourself and then you have to ask the question. Anyone? Or I'm unable to see. Or people are tired. Chalo, low emission zone kar hi dete hain abhi chal ke. Okay, so if no further question, then maybe one final question to Nitin. If you could highlight from the experiment of Chandni Chowk, what are the most important 2-3 challenges that you faced? And that would set the context on what we expect once we plan to go on ground.
The foremost challenge, as I mentioned to you, about the perception that we have already discussed, and that perception is okay. But now next we move to the challenges on the infrastructure, because there we have to create a few areas for the pedestrian mobility, and most of the transformers were there on the other side of the road. So we needed to bring it to such an area that where it will not hinder the pedestrian movement or the motorized vehicle movement. So there we had a lot of difficulty, challenges, because we thought of going underground, but it was not possible. Then we realized, then we have brought it back to the center of it. Then also there we have to face a judicial review, because a group of people have gone that it is not going as per the heritage of the area. It is going to be against the heritage of the area where earlier it was a channel. So that was one of the challenges. And third, if you talk about, then certainly it is, and still we are trying to work on it, that how to decongest its RTL roads as well. So there we are working on to bringing a traffic circulation plan or bringing some kind of a dedicated public transportation. So as I said, that will remain a challenge, because the Chandni Chowk has been successful because metro stations were already there. And other areas, if we talk about the other cities, also as the world, we talk about the 15-minute city. So that concept has to be there. We have to work on ki anywhere if you are creating a low economic zone, so the people should be able to walk to the nearest public transportation within 5 or 10 minutes. So as the most of the people, they talk about the last mile connectivity. So sometimes I ask all those advocacy group, so let us talk about the first mile connectivity also, because unless you make me move from my home to reach Chandni Chowk by metro, that is difficult. And that is why in the most of the areas, we have not been able to shift from, transition has not been taken from motorized vehicle to your public transportation. The e-vehicles are coming up. We have got beautiful electric buses, thanks to all of you. and we are also getting now the under switch. We are also getting few of the loading unloading goods vehicles are also coming electric. We also got the tricycles which are electric. But yes, we have to move them. We have to move people to use it. But again, there is also, this, though it is not connected to your question, but I must say, the public transportation, if we talk about the taxation on the public transportation, whether you talk about the taxi or whether you talk about it, it is the auto rickshaw. First, we restrict the number of the auto rickshaws. That should not be there. The public transportation should be unrestricted. As many vehicles we bring into the city, it is good. And second is also the taxation. If we talk about earlier, I don't know at present, what is it? Buying a commercial vehicle, using it a vehicle for the commercial purposes, you need to pay more taxes than for buying a private car. So that has to change. Taxation has to be more on the private vehicles, electric vehicles to be subsidized, and the commercial vehicles, whether it is of the electrical, CNG, it has to be much more cheaper so that more people can buy it, more people can be employed gainfully over there. And again, we also don't find the basically operational part. If we talk about in Old Delhi also, we see these taxis and the tricycles, we have not been able to create the pickup and drop-off zones. So that is one a mistake, I think, that has taken place, which we are trying to rectify. And that has to be, that is one of the negative part of this redevelopment, which need to be addressed. So that we are working on it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think three things that came out was, one, how do you change the perception? Second, what do you do with the utilities? Because in most cities, it's a nightmare to work on utilities. And third, how do you develop the overall mobility? I think that's really important. I think, so what's the next step to me, I think, is, while we now know what is low emission zone, I think next step is the how part. And I think that is going to be where the crux of the challenge lies. That how do you initiate a conversation? How do you move from a concept into reality? I think that is something which is going to be very, very interesting and important, and will trigger. Yeah, Namita, you had a question. Yeah, just.
So actually, it's really interesting. I wanted to understand, like, what made you pick Chandni Chowk in the first place, apart from the metro? Because even CP has a really good metro network. We haven't seen that success in CP. So what made you pick Chandni Chowk as your first sort of case study, and why you think it worked when something like CP has not worked? And have you tried in other areas as well, or seen some sort of success or failure or any other learnings?
Chandni Chowk was not a choice by the government. It was an outcome of a petition in the High Court. And then this came that how we can go about it. So the Chandni Chowk, when the project was, then it was talked, it started with, it is, I must tell you how it started. The petition was to allow non-motorized vehicles like cycle rickshaws in the area which was restricted by the municipal corporation. So an NGO that went to the court, it says the cycle rickshaws are the zero emission mobility. That time we are not talking about the electric vehicle. So let it be allowed. So that is how the litigation began, and then it developed into a kind of a situation where it has been decided, yes, now it is a time that we must move to creating a low emission zone. Because Delhi is facing, for past 5-6 years, we are also seeing the pollution level is spiking here. So that is also one of the reasons that let us create it. And there was a will of the government also to move for it. The government has also provided the funding, and the judicial support was there, which was resolving the few key issues which are related to the regulatory. And the next question which you asked about the Connaught Place. Connaught Place, again, means, do we really need it? We must ask, it is not, the question has to be asked whether we need it or not. There the situation was different. Their situation was congestion was there. And that kind of congestion we don't see here in the Connaught Place because of their better traffic circulation plan and other things. So let us, means while doing this, creating a low emission zone, let us not be working on the restrictive principle that yes, we have to create everywhere the low emission zone. We have to choose the area very carefully, that whether we need it or not. And as one of the panelists in the previous session has said, the traffic congestion is also one of the reasons for the emissions. So if we have got the moving traffic, then certainly the emissions is lesser than if it is idling there in the traffic signals. So that is why that question has to be seen, whether the Connaught Place really need it or not. And similarly, it goes for the other areas while we choosing the low emission zones.
That's
Interesting insight, especially how the conversation started with a petition to allow cycle rickshaw, which eventually led to the low emission zone. So maybe one takeaway is to file some of these petitions in other places and have low emission zones
Thank you
going.
so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Namita, for the first question. Now we have many more questions coming.
No, so interestingly, Pune has been trying out something very similar for the last 3 years. So in 1987 DP, Pune had said that one of its streets, which is in the older part of the city, to be pedestrianized on a trial basis, and if it's a success, then it should be done on a permanent intervention. So nothing happened for maybe around 30 years. And then finally, one day in 2021, Pune celebrated its first pedestrian day where they said that we'll pedestrianize the street. It's been going on for 3 years now, but now it has turned into a festival rather than a discussion to create something permanently. So just wanted to know, one of the few reasons why this happened was because there are a lot of shops, banks, etc., which require a lot of cargo in and out and high security vans going in and out. So was there any similar situation in Chandni Chowk, and how was it dealt with?
Yes, the situation is also similar here. So while issuing the notification for restriction of the vehicle, the restriction here is from the 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It is it is 24 hours, it is not restricted. It is from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And also certain category of vehicles, which also includes your cash van, ambulance, fire brigade, and the maintenance vehicles has been exempted from entering the area during the restricted hours also. And the second thing, I think that in the Pune, I am not very much aware of this, but as far as the Chandni Chowk is concerned, while we are doing it, so Chandni Chowk road is almost 1.3 kilometers from Red Fort Junction to your Fatehpuri Mosque. So here again, that is why I think this particular word comes very significant. Here we are not talking about the low emission streets. We are talking about the low emission zones. So that is why when we restricted the Chandni Chowk, we have created a zone. And that zone is not only this 1.3 kilometer, but that zone is other, it's an influence area also. So this zone is almost you can say 2.5 square kilometer. So that is why it is also important that when we are talking about creating a low emission area, then we should not be restricting it to the street. It should be a zone so that other activities should not hamper, and the local economic development has to take place. If we can't do it, if we are killing the local economy, no. We have to ensure the local economy has to be thriving there because of this intervention. So that is why at the beginning I said that it has to be environmental sustainability, that has to be seen. Also the technical feasibility also seen. But as I told, in the 4 Ps, that is the last is profit. The profit has to be there. Unless we put anything in the context of economy and the profit, then this kind of intervention may not be accepted by the stakeholders. So that is the thing. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Maybe we'll test your vocal cords.
First of all, let me thank ICCT to organize this. This has been a wonderful day. I thought I will be staying here till lunch, but continued for the entire day. really a lot of insights which are there. But one key thing which is there is most of our policies are like, let's prevent this. We'll ask somebody to restrict to something, but there will be no encouragement for the people who want to follow it. Like today, say somebody wants to move out 40 kilometers ahead of it. Obviously, he will have to incur extra cost to get his goods back into Delhi. What is the incentive? Can he be GST exempted? Can he also have certain other exemptions which are there? Because by the time he will get those perishable goods back into Delhi, the goods may or may not be there. So there should has to be something like you are forced to buy from those companies which have moved into low emission zone or which are helping. Because you really see in Delhi, there are industries have been asked to go back to outside Delhi, but you can flout the norms any day. Every day you hear 8 people have died into certain area because illegal industries were operating there. So this is happening. So ultimately, the incentives have to be there. And similar example is there in terms of like, there will be no parking zones. That okay, this is the time you don't need to come because the traffic is there. But what is the harm? 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning, those should be converted into free parking zones so that people come in the later in the night when the traffic problems are not there, and it will contribute to the low emission zones. And I think the policies have to become from restricting to incentivizing so that people are able to follow it.
I think absolutely, it's a very valid point. And how do you create policies which enable a certain change in habit rather than kind of restricting? And I think maybe that is what we are seeing from Chandni Chowk. Now that success of Chandni Chowk is also inspiring some of the other markets to also replicate this kind of model. So I think that is something which is very interesting. So I think with this we'll come to a close, and before we officially go, maybe I'll give it to Vaibhav to do a formal closing. And then again, thank you everyone for taking your time joining us today. And especially thanks to NITI Aayog for being a part of it, as well as Ragari Foundation and Sustainable Mobility Network. But before you close, Vaibhav, over to you to finally close it.
Thanks, Amit. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you everyone for taking time out today to attend this session. There were a lot of good, insightful takeaways from this workshop today, and I'll try to summarize it in 3 or 4 keywords. One was technology. Across all the panels, including the plenary session, there was a very strong focus on all the speakers emphasizing that there is a need to exploit technology in low emission zone interventions. The second thing that came about very clearly was multi-sectoral, collaborative, integrated approach is the only way forward. And as Mr. Amitabh Kant in his keynote address said, everything is solvable if all stakeholders can be brought on the same table to work towards a common goal. And also that, the second quote, he said that, the pollution is an airshed issue that needs to be looked at holistically. Third thing that came about was citizens should be kept at the center of all decision making. While we are creating low emission zones from a perspective of improving health of the citizens, the intervention should not leave them out. For example, in the morning, I think Mr. Kant or Mr. Sinha mentioned that when we are saying that we are restricting certain types of vehicles, we should also think about what are the alternatives. One interesting, I think in the previous panel, one interesting catchphrase was low emission zones should not become low economic zones. So things like that, basically highlighting towards the fact that citizens need to be in the center of decision making. So I think there was one other I would like to add. I think you answered my question about what should be the right approach. Hearing Chandni Chowk's example, I think judiciary is the right approach. I'm not putting that as a key takeaway right now. But there are many more takeaways. ICCT will compile a summary of this, of the day and share with everyone. With that, I'd just like to conclude by thanking Mr. Amitabh Kant and NITI Aayog for their guidance in and support in making this possible. I also thank my partners, Rahagiri Foundation and Sustainable Mobility Network in this planning of the event. And a big thank you to all the speakers, all the participants, and the ICCT team for making this a success. Thank you so much.